Hello, I'm mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say do not count, Dan.
And I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, as Mark said, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say definitely count. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy. And Mark, one of our listeners reached out to me and said, like, hey, I've got a bead on, like, an Amazing Fantasy 15 reprint.
Oh.
You should buy that just to, like, stick it to Mark. And I'm not about that. Like, hard-earned win on the Amazing Fantasy 15, Mark. If I'm going to pull something on you, it's got to be legit.
I mean, it would be like getting the record reprint for Amazing Spider-Man number 1 back in the day. Like, come on, like what? Even if it's like a first reprint, that no, I'm not. I'm, I know we talk about we can't judge another person's collection, but I'm not letting you have that. I'm not counting that as a win for you if you ever went that route. So
I'm so serious about this, and I talked about this on a recent episode that I own both the normal printing of Ultimate Spider-Man 1 and the KB Toys printing of Ultimate Spider-Man 1. And I bought the Ultimate Spider-Man number 1 after I already owned the KB Toys 1 because I was like, no, I want the real thing. So, like, I am not about that. I am about owning you, Mark, and getting a win in, but I won't do it cheaply.
Well, with all of that banter said, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with our increasingly pedantic show about Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and of course keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon.
Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 57. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover features artwork by John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Morry Hollowell. The interior pages feature pencils by John Romita Jr., inks by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on September 11th, 2024. 2024, not 2024. All right, Mark. We have, historically always praised opening chapters to major, like, multi-part arcs in the Spider-Man, the past 10 years of doing this show. We always start super strong with strong hooks and emotional resonance, and somehow these stories tend to lose Peter Parker and all of the care and attention to characters that we liked in the opening chapters. This is the sophomore chapter of this story, if you will. I'm curious, do you think this bucks the trend, or is it another in the ongoing trend of Spider-Man stories that don't really feature Spider-Man and thus lose their emotional stakes?
I mean, can I pick neither as an answer? Because I don't think it necessarily bucks the trend, but I also don't feel like this is necessarily like losing the thread of the story, or at least not yet. I mean, like, it still seems firmly in the realm of Spider-Man. I just, there were some twists and turns here that, and we'll obviously get into it as we go bit by bit here, but, like, some things where I'm like, and I, as you all might recall, I was not quite as high on the opening chapter of this arc as you were. So, and mainly because of some of the flags I feel like I sounded in that episode, and the reason why I sounded those flags is because, like, where they ended up going, not that I was predicting it, but I was just kind of like, yeah, like it kind of puts people into a corner, and I don't know if I like what the options are, and that's kind of where we're at here. So I'm not going to say it's like another another bad follow up, but like at the same time, I'm not like, oh wow, this really like just sold this comic through and through. I don't know. Like, what did you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you mostly. I still really enjoyed this issue, and I do think that it gives Peter a lot to do in it, which has been like kind of one of our complaints
Sure.
in the past. Not only as Peter Parker, where he gets like a nice scene or two, but also as Spider-Man, where he is leading the pack. Whereas in Gang War, he was leading the pack, quote unquote. But really kind of took, I don't know, a backseat to the actions of his teammates and the ongoing gang struggle. Whereas here, I feel like not only is he kind of like leading the police force with ideas and ways to play this out, but like the characters reflect on that too. They're like, Spider-Man's watching him, so he's going to be fine, and that does a lot to sell like your protagonist as being like a huge part of the book and kind of leading the action. And so that really worked for me, continuing over from the last issue. I think where this issue kind of takes a step down is it doesn't have the same page count to really get that much, to truly feel like a one-shot with all the things that it's doing. I think the pacing is excellent, but I still think there's a little bit too much going on all at once. Like, is this a book about the court proceedings? Is it about, this high stakes chase? Is it about this relationship between Tombstone and his daughter? Is it about Peter brushing up against the law or law enforcement and justice? It's just a lot going on, and it's a second chapter, and that is kind of to be expected. But it feels like, like it kind of introduced this courtroom thing only to kind of completely jettison it almost immediately.
Yeah, which I don't know if you want to get into that right now or talk about something else first, but like I mean that was part of one of my big complaints with this in terms of a narrative is like I feel it's funny that you feel like there's a lot going on because like I guess there is in theory, but at the same time like one of my overarching complaints here is that the comic just felt flimsy, and maybe you're right, it could just be a page count thing, but like I don't know, like it felt like, not that the ending was abrupt, it just came sooner than I was expecting it to, based on kind of like how the story felt like it was flowing. It was like, the crescendo didn't crescend, maybe that was kind of what it was. But like, yeah, I in one breath it's like, okay, it clearly wasn't terribly interested in exploring the legalities of what Tombstone was doing, which, we don't necessarily need to do that. This is not a Daredevil comic, yet at the same time, like that was part of the reason why I was like not a huge fan of them introducing the legal aspect to it in the first part, because it's like you're setting something up that, in a Spider-Man story that we don't normally, to a place we don't normally go to. And as a result, your options were to follow that storyline further down the hole and maybe become distracted by it, or to just abandon it completely and kind of make the whole exercise pointless in the first place. Because like, what did we accomplish in putting Tombstone in jail for 24 hours? I mean, I guess what we accomplished was that Janice turned on him, but maybe there are other ways to have established that. I don't know. I'm not going to profess to be the writer here, but. Yeah, I felt like, to me, like it was a narrative move last issue that kind of painted the creators in the corner, and I don't necessarily feel that they executed their way out of it in a graceful way. We're going to move on. It's probably the last we're going to hear of it, maybe. I don't know, unless they want to explore more of the Peter-Michelle relationship, which I could take or leave. It's been 2 issues now since we saw... And I'm forgetting her name, which means she's that memorable of a love interest, but I'm just forgetting right now because Shay. Thank you. I'm forgetting because I'm old, not because the character's not well written. Okay, there's a difference. Anyway, I didn't love that turn of events, even though I do feel like we kind of got to the fireworks factory and setting up what the true conflict is going to be in terms of the Lincoln family drama and Spider-Man's role in the middle of it.
Well, that's just the thing. Like, I think the silliest part of this, and you alluded to it, is the whole like idea that Tombstone immediately gets out on bail, like because he has a good lawyer. And I love the idea of like super villain lawyer, because we always get to see superhero lawyer,
Right.
and things like that. And I'm all there for that. And the rivalry that it sets up with Peter, even if it's kind of with a kind of underbaked character that, has been seen sparingly. But like, that's the history of Amazing Spider-Man, is Shashan will show up every couple hundred issues, and that at least elevates her to supporting cast in some way, But like, it just seems kind of ludicrous that like this guy that just like tried to murder someone in broad daylight. I mean, I guess it wasn't broad daylight, but you get what I mean. Like, Peter makes a really solid point when he goes up to Michelle in this, and he's like, this guy just tried to kill me. And it's like, okay, yeah, but like, so who authorized that bail,
Right.
and those conditions? And maybe it'll come back around and we'll see that Tombstone did actually violate his parole or whatever in going to see Janice and attacking the guards there at the end of the comic. But it's just kind of a weird thing. It's like, okay, he's going to send all of his surrogates out to avoid crime and then also go do that. The reality is, it doesn't really matter, because like I'm hooked on the A plot, but you are getting weird like details about the B plot. And maybe if more was done with the scene where Tombstone's in prison, which it was a great setup for like Spider-Man going in there and talking to him on the phone, which
Right.
like, I don't know how that was authorized.
I did think about that, like the Spider-Man showing
yeah.
up in Rikers Island, being like, "Yeah, that's cool. Like, no touching." I just,
I mean, maybe that's just it. Is that we're thinking too hard about a book that opens with a guy in spandex walking
Right.
into a prison,
Right. Right.
But like, if you're, to your point, if you're going to set up that you're going to like take him down via courtroom proceedings, you better at least have some like investment in how the American justice system plays out to some regard.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't necessarily need this to be a legal drama, but like I just it was a decision. It was a decision that I questioned the first time around, so it just begs me to question it as it resolved in the way that it did. I think that's really what it boils down to. I'm not, this is not I told you so, but like, it's also me being like, oh, well, that's why I didn't love it in the first place. Like that's kind of where we're at. But
I do want to say I really like, as opposed to Gang War, and like, to me, this is already like has a lot of echoes of Gang War,
Mm-hmm.
like the citywide spectacle, the various heroes that are returning from Gang War, and the kind of fallout of that stuff. But it does seem like this one is painting a smaller picture that really focuses around the drama between Tombstone, Spider-Man, and Beetle, and all the other characters kind of play more of a back seat. And I'm happy about that. Like, to me, I'm already kind of more invested in the kind of character drama of this than I was in the Gang War drama post, Randy Robertson being taken out or off the board and ignored. And so, like, the fact that Peter's life was threatened makes Tombstone an immediate threat.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, we know what this guy is capable of. And, the end of this issue, I think, reinforces that. Like, he's going to do whatever it takes to get the job done. So I'm excited to see where this goes. Beetle's role in it feels a little bit half-baked. Like, she has a nice quiet scene with Randy here. But like, I don't really know where her head's at the moment. But I think like Spider-Man and Tombstone's investment seems really apparent. And if that's where it's going to come down to is Spider-Man versus Tombstone, like, I think it's doing the work to get me invested in that.
All right. Well, the other thing I think we got to talk about here is of course the artwork, because like, look, there are probably no two bigger fans of John Romita Jr. than you and me, but at the same time, like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's it's been a moment since we've had like a kind of signature JR issue, like even some of his big stories kind of last year with Zeb, like I just felt like we really haven't had one that kind of sizzled and popped the way we know it usually can. And I feel like this one definitely kind of rang the bell in that regard, right? I mean, like this was like pure JR. He clearly loves Tombstone and the underworld, and like this was just, it was visually fun, and there was just a lot of creative stuff here. I alluded to in the synopsis the the Digger and White Rabbit fight with the armored truck, and just the whole vibe of that whole scene. Like it was really visually creative stuff that was signature John Romita Jr.
I mean, I love the pacing on John Romita Jr. comics, and I think he and Zeb have a really good thing going. Like, every page turn is great, and I know I've been saying this, but, like, no matter what comic I'm reading from Zeb, I know that, like, he's going to think about the craft of comics in making it, and this is no different. And, like, John Romita Jr., I think, only amplifies where his care and attention goes. And so I found the pacing on that whole subway sequence to be tremendous, with the how it like slowly grew to that double page spread of the car coming up through the ground and into the police cars. It reminded me of the Joker truck scene from the Dark Knight movie. Maybe just because of the location, but also for the kind of thinking about the verticality of these, New York City spaces, or in that case, I guess, what was it, Chicago?
Yeah.
Or was it Philly?
No, it's Chicago. They filmed that in Chicago. Yeah.
Okay. So I thought that stuff was really great, but then it's balanced out with really great character emoting scenes, and a special shout out to the cover of this issue, which I find exciting in its unusualness of the two of them sitting there in talking over the phones. But then the highlight for me even too, I don't know who does the cover design, if that's just the editors or like Joe Caramagna or somebody else on the staff, but the reflection of the Amazing Spider-Man in the glass I thought was a really nice touch. It reminds me of the stuff from the Hulk smashing through the Amazing Spider-Man title, back in the day when it was Todd McFarlane drawing,
right?
Things like that. I always enjoy it when they can make the title incorporated into the scene in some way. Were there any images that stood out to you from this issue?
I mean, really, mostly the fight on the armored car, I think, was probably the best stuff. I mean, even some of the simple stuff inside the prison. We've joked about the kind of the credibility of Spider-Man going in with spandex, but it was I enjoyed how it was set up and the pacing of it, and actually kind of like the brightness of that with the colors there. But also, and of course, the last image of just Tombstone arriving and just kind of the menace of that, and like I said, this was to me probably the best JR we've gotten in several arcs. I don't know if there was anything in Gang War that was quite as good as this was.
Yeah, it's funny to me that the letters page, which I know you don't read, seems to be implying that John Romita Jr. is sticking around on this book, because it really does seem like a kind of like a bookend for him as well. I mean, there's several visual call-outs in this issue and the previous issue to the opening arc of the Zeb Wells run, and here we have that image of Spider-Man on top of the armored vehicle with the lights that are all hazy and blown out, that I thought was really striking, and it's an exact mirror image or a near exact image from the first issue of this run, and I think that's cool that he is calling back to himself and the kind of full circle nature that we're getting into with this particular storyline. Whether it sticks the landing or not, I feel like for JR, this is a sort of culmination of his time together with Zeb. So I think that stuff is all pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think Romita has certainly proven over the years that he can kind of work with almost anybody, but like there does seem to be a uniqueness and a special quality to how he has paired explicitly with Zeb over this run here. So yeah, agreed. There's kind of it's a swan song, even if it's not truly a swan song for JR, because like you could just, you compare him with Dan Slott, you compare him with JMS, you compare him with whoever, Howard Mackey. I mean, it just does not matter. The guy will deliver. But
I was just going to say, like, friend of the show, Howard Mackey, judge his run all you want, but the JR artwork in that run is really great.
Yes, all that rain on, as Howard would joke. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Slack?
Yeah, go for it, Mark.
Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what's been going on in the Slack this week?
Well, Mark, apropos of nothing, a conversation started in the Slack this week about our favorite Sinister Six stories, and people were throwing out all kinds of stuff, which was to say that like there wasn't really like any consensus on like what the definitive Sinister Six story was, and it made me think about it a lot too, because I don't really necessarily think there is a great Sinister Six story, like maybe Annual #1, where it's more kind of a novelty, but even then I'm not sure it really takes full advantage of the idea of the Sinister Six. And so my response, I think, ultimately ended up being Ultimate Six, the first formation of that, where they decide to attack the Capitol, or I guess it's the White House, and Peter is the sixth member of the Sinister Six in that particular story. I think that one really feels like Peter is up against an overwhelming force of characters that he, and in an impossible situation. And to me, that kind of is like what the appeal of a Sinister Six story is. Do you have a particular favorite Sinister Six story, Mark?
I mean,
as I quiz you out of nowhere in this ongoing section?
That's the thing. I don't find this to be a quiz because it's funny. And, coming from me, you're going to ha-ha me and throw this in my
here
face.
We go.
But I think there really is only one Sinister Six story that's worth talking about, and that's the first annual issue. Because even if you don't necessarily think that they take full advantage of what the Sinister Six entails, I frequently alluded to that comic as being a wonder of the world, just in terms of craft and structure, and just like kind of demonstrating what a comic of that nature could be like. I just don't like. It's hard for me to count the Ultimate issues, not count like counting our collections, but like think about it in those regards, because as we've discussed, like in the past on this show, like my relationship to Ultimate is really more kind of tertiary, just in terms of having read them in binge mode almost. And while I have a lot of fondness for some of the opening few arcs, like outside of that Wolverine Spider-Man body switch one, which I one time alluded to liking and got like a lot of hate mail for that.
Well, you should know that one, the idea of that story was submitted by Nick Lowe.
Well, now you're just exposing me as the shill for Nick Lowe that I am, that the internet knows me to be. But that aside, like, no, I think that just give me those Ditko splash pages alone, and I don't even need a comic. You know what I mean? Like that alone.
Well, good. That's kind of most of the comic.
Yeah. Like that's that. That elevates it to like an all-timer for me. But like, I mean, seriously though, like there had never been a comic like that in Marvel before, in my opinion, and that comic kind of broke the mold through in terms of like what like a jumbo size, like multi-prong, like bring everything in and throw the kitchen sink at something would look like. So there you go. Mark is defending an annual.
It's also the origin of Aunt May's affection for Dr. Octopus.
There you go.
Like give it another mark in the win column. Awesome. Well, if you want to join in on conversations like that, except without Mark, come join our amazing Slack. There's a link in the description of this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute.
Mark, he doesn't.
All right,
He
Mark.
doesn't read the letters page. He doesn't go to the Slack. He doesn't. I mean, what else don't I do, Dan? Like this is an airing of grievances.
Oh yes, that's exactly right. Festivus is coming up, Mark.
You got it. You got it. What else we want to talk about with this comic here?
Yeah, sure. So, I think this issue is kind of notable for like having almost kind of like two twists in it. Like, first that it is, Randy is in the armored vehicle, but Janice is not. And he is accompanied by She-Hulk, which catches specifically White Rabbit off guard, which I thought was a nice little subplot in the story, kind of revealing the character of White Rabbit, who has been slowly developed over the course of this run here and there. And then the other twist that, yes, Tombstone knew that or knew some element of that and planned to show up and confront Janice, which he does at the end of the issue. What'd you think about these twists, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that, like, it just felt kind of not obvious, but like it wasn't shocking. And what we had, we had to start this run involving Tombstone, probably one of the better executed twists or double turns or whatever you want to call it that we really have seen in a Spider-Man comic in recent memory. It's part of the reason why I feel like we were so hyped for this run in the first place. Was like, oh wow, look what they did in this first story, and kind of how they turned things on its ear, setting the stage obviously for where we are now. So it's kind of like, when you have something that masterfully executed, when they kind of go back to the well, and I'm not saying that they were necessarily like thinking that lightning can strike twice, but like you're looking for it more now anyway. So like, even if something that, even if it's intentionally less hidden of a twist, it you're still just kind of like, oh, all right, like, I'm not shocked. I don't know. Am I making sense? You know what I mean? Like, like this clearly wasn't going to have the craft behind it that the first one did. So like, there's almost a part of me that's like, why even do it a second time? You know what I mean? Like, I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it even though I saw it coming, because I like the idea that, like, you can't pull this trick on Tombstone because he's the guy that invented it, and maybe that makes our heroes look kind of dumb,
right?
That they think they could pull this on him. Although I think that they did, to their credit, like their plan at Gracie Mansion, where they're like, we're going to put everything into this, like, I get their thinking, and just because I, the reader who has a sort of, narrator omniscient view on everything, like, could call it, doesn't mean that it's out of character for them to not have thought through the double twist,
right,
of it all. They are characters operating in a story, so. Like, I'm okay with that, because I think it only increases the threat of Tombstone in a way that I don't think it makes, like, our characters got a moment to be smart, and then we're outsmarted, and so I don't think it makes them look super dumb. And as a reader, like, I guess I figured that they would pull that switcheroo, but I guess I didn't anticipate that Tombstone would anticipate it. And that's what gave me that sort of like, aha, like, and so I felt the same way the heroes did at the end, which was like, oh crap, let's get back to Janice.
Yeah, I guess, yes. But to that point, like, I kind of had two flaws with how, like, the ending was executed. And I mean, one was, to nitpick, it's like, why are you leaving Janice kind of without superpower protection, if you will, or we don't even, and I guess that leads me to the second thing. You don't even see the altercation that brought Tombstone to the door, which, I know, like, that image, I did think that image of Tombstone at the door looking menacing was, was a good ending to the story. But, like, I think if you want to, like, build the drama, like, maybe kind of just show him the rage kind of ripping through whatever is there. Yeah. Maybe make whatever, if it's not Luke Cage or She-Hulk, because you don't want to use them in that spot, just show that Tombstone ripping through it was like, oh wow, like he really means business. Because like if you're truly trying to protect this asset, you're not going to just put a couple of red shirts there, even though that's what you're going to do for the sake of the story. But like you don't want it to be that obvious where they could just be ripped apart off screen and you just kind of accept like, oh, and here comes Tombstone to finish the job. I don't know. Like I feel like the drama to that point could have been built better from a visual standpoint of kind of showing the true menace of what they were up against here. So that would be my other ding against it.
Yeah, I mean, we get like those kind of like close-up images and sound effects and stuff that imply that there is all this violence. But I think you're right, like seeing maybe even something on the level of like Shed, where like it's just him like a shark just kind of going through everybody.
Definitely.
And his teeth, that would have been something. The ending reminds me a little bit of the ending of that issue in Gang War where the like Hellfire gang showed up and you and I were like, that can't be it.
Yeah.
Right? Like who are those guys? They can't possibly be Hellfire guys. There's got to be another twist, and I don't think it's quite to that level because I do think that final page really works, but you're right. Like I do think like clearing up like the level of protection that they placed around Janice would have given Tombstone's like barrage in there more power. I did want to talk about that the White Rabbit arc in this because I actually thought that was kind of a nice little B plot to kind of pull into a single issue. Like that's the kind of touch like an issue like this didn't have to do, but like shows the level of care that's being put into this is like to say, here's a deep C-list, D-list character that we've invested time in. And we're going to see like the limits of like, of who she is as a character and the time we've spent at the bachelor party with her and Janice and so on. And she ultimately gets there and realizes that Tombstone knew she would not betray her friend ultimately. And I thought that was a really like nice setup, and I think could potentially set up for even more allegiance changing in future chapters. What do you think about the White Rabbit element?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was a good little turnaround for her, and then like you said, I also feel like we're getting set up for a fair bit of more double crossing and betrayals, and this one's going to go to this character. I think we're not done with the double crossing is my bottom line, and I think this sets up for that.
Absolutely. The last thing I wanted to talk about is Spider-Man and his motives here. Because I think we do get more of Peter's internal thoughts in this story, and there's a really strong reason for him to want to take down Tombstone, given that he was almost killed by Tombstone. But he goes on this rant about like how Tombstone and people like him feel like they can play by their own rules, and like that the rules don't apply to them in the way they apply to everyone else, and that it was time to establish who the real players in this drama are. And I think he by that he means himself. He's going to step up and establish himself as like the force to push a back against Tombstone. I'm trying to follow through on like the kind of like narrative and character threads that are keeping Spider-Man motivated in this. What do you think is motivating Spider-Man? Like, do you have a good sense of that in this comic?
I don't, and that's troubling. I feel like we've had a few moments over the course of this run where it feels like Peter is reasserting himself as kind of being what his responsibilities are and what he should be doing as Spider-Man, and then I feel like we move away from it or we drop it, and I guess that's part of it right here. Not that because we've moved away or have dropped it yet, but just because we have kind of seen this before, and like we haven't like connected the dots with it in a meaningful way. So like it's almost like until it all leads to something, it's hard for me to actually contemplate what the motivations are, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I bring it up because like I found these like moments to be like nice and like good sentiments, but I don't know like thematically what they're building on. It feels kind of hollow platitudes of like something Peter would say, but not necessarily something like that. Like you said, has been reinforced throughout the run. Like the idea of like bending the rules and things like that. Like doesn't I don't know where that's coming from. Like if it was like instead like Peter saying, you know, I've had a bad year and everything has been playing against me, but it's finally time for me to stand up and like take fate into my own hands and not be dealt a bad, you know, card. I'm not going to let an assault on me go unpunished. I'd be like, yeah, that, like we've seen him beaten down in this run and he's not going to let a guy try to kill him and let that stand,
right?
You know, but like this idea of like rules and justice and all that stuff, it's like, okay, but like, why is that important to Peter all of a sudden? Not that it's not normally important to Peter, but like, why emphasize that of all things?
Yeah. No, I don't have a counter for you.
No, I don't expect you to.
Okay.
Yeah, I just. To me, I was like, okay, I like this, but
yeah,
but where's this coming from?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Mark, why don't you give us your grade for this issue?
You know, I think I gave the last issue a B. I'm going to give this a B minus because I think it's, you know, as I said in the intro, it you know didn't quite click as well as the first issue did, but like I don't think it was a steep drop off. So I'm just, you know, going to inch a notch lower than last time.
Yeah, and I think I would be at a B minus for the writing, but like I really just loved looking at Romita Jr.'s art, and I think Zeb lets him kind of just take it away at some points. And so like this one to me is a solid B, and maybe I'm wearing my John Romita Jr. love on my sleeve, but so be it. If I'm going to go to bat for someone,
I would say. There's no better love on your sleeve except maybe like of your wife and family, but other than that, you know, like.
And John Romita Jr. could beat up all of them, so you know, like I'll take him in my armored vehicle. You know,
I was say he could beat up your wife and family. Is that what you just said?
I mean, I hope he's too nice of a guy to do that.
Yeah,
but if he wanted to,
oh man,
he could beat up almost everybody in my extended life.
I am not going to touch that or unpack that, but.
Well, here, you can take Marcio Menyz, and I'll take John Romita Jr.
Okay.
in a brawl, and who knows who walks out of that
alive.
There
you go. Anyway, with that in mind, it's that time. It definitely is that time, which means it's time for all good things to come to an end. And we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
But anybody who's reading these comics knows the real brawl is happening in the letters pages, as people keep sending in letters about Mary Jane's marriage and the youth of Spider-Man to that letters page for Nick Lowe to kind of respond and tee himself up for more pain online. But that's a discussion for another time. Maybe it'll be on our Patreon. Yes, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. I'm really excited to announce that our next round of artwork is going to be coming from amazing Spider-Man artist Marcelo Ferreira, who is going to be doing a Spider-Man and Doctor Strange team-up artwork piece for us as they explore some other realm of crazy dicko-ness.
Nice.
So that's going to be a lot of fun. So go check out the Patreon if you want to get in on that. A special thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do. Plus, a thank you to our newest members, Michael Hardy and David Patrick Frost.
Awesome. Well, as we wind down 2024, Dan and I really want to increase all the awesome work that we do on this show. So if you are already a patron or want to become one, please help us to meet our goals and make this a better podcast by considering supporting our show. Just go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and click on the big Patreon button to get started.
So, Mark, until we are both personally invited to Gracie Manor and given the key to the city for our commendable work in the field of podcasting. What's our motto?
With Eric Adams, I don't think so, Dan. But with great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.
Do we think Eric Adams even knows that podcasting is a thing?
I mean, maybe like a vegan podcast or something. I don't know. Or
I would listen to an Eric Adams podcast at least for one episode for the kind of insane ramblings that he would give out.
The unintentional comedy factor. I mean,
Yes.
All right. Well, there you go. Now we know what Dan likes to listen to.
I still don't understand how he became the mayor of the city. You'll have to explain that to me someday.
You think I know? Okay, whatever. Anyway.